Welcome to Mysteries of the Universe. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode we turn our focus to one of the deepest questions ever asked by humankind. What truly happens when we die? Is death the final end, or a transformation of energy and consciousness into another state of existence within the vast cosmos? Across science, history, and spirituality, clues point toward an astonishing mystery connecting life, death, and the very fabric of the universe itself. From the earliest human civilizations, the mystery of death has occupied the heart of both religion and science. Ancient cultures often viewed death not as an end, but as a gateway, a transition into another realm governed by unseen forces. The Egyptians believed in a journey through the Duat, an underworld realm filled with trials that tested the soul. The Book of the Dead, inscribed with spells and instructions, was designed to guide the deceased into the afterlife. In Mesopotamia, the concept of a shadowy realm called Irkala was embraced, where all souls went regardless of their deeds. The Greeks imagined the river Styx separating the world of the living from the underworld, while the Norse spoke of Valhalla for warriors and hell for the rest. Eastern traditions held different but equally elaborate views. In Hinduism, death initiates a cycle of rebirth called samsara, governed by karma. The soul, or Atman, migrates through different lifetimes until it reaches moksha, liberation from the cycle. In Buddhism, similar ideas prevail, but the self is seen as a process rather than a permanent entity. Tibetan monks developed detailed texts like the Bardo Thodol, describing the intermediate state between death and rebirth, filled with vivid imagery, sounds, and visions that reflect one's consciousness. These ancient perspectives were not mere superstition. They were often linked with astronomical observations and cosmic principles. The stars, planets, and cycles of the moon played symbolic roles in many death rituals. Burial chambers in pyramids aligned with specific constellations. Mayan death lore was encoded in their calendar system and temple architecture. The night sky was not merely a backdrop, but a map of the soul's return journey. As civilizations advanced, so did our understanding of the physical body and brain. Yet even today, modern science has not fully explained the moment of death or the experience of consciousness itself. Electrical activity ceases, brainwaves fade, but the subjective experiences reported near death suggest something more. Across cultures and time periods, people have described floating above their bodies, entering tunnels of light, encountering deceased relatives, or feeling a profound sense of peace and unity. These reports are not confined to spiritual believers. Many come from medical professionals, soldiers, pilots, and individuals with no prior exposure to religious doctrines. Some of the earliest scientific studies into near-death experiences began in the 1970s. Researchers like Dr. Raymond Moody and later Dr. Bruce Grayson attempted to document and analyze thousands of these accounts. Their findings suggested consistent patterns that defied purely neurological explanations. If death is a threshold, then what lies beyond it may not be a void, but a transformation. Ancient wisdom, spiritual tradition, and modern inquiry all hint at the same possibility, that our consciousness, like energy, does not disappear, but may continue in ways we are only beginning to understand. In the pursuit of scientific understanding, the question of what happens when we die inevitably turns to the nature of consciousness itself. What is it that allows us to experience the world, to be aware of our own existence, and to reflect on life and death? Neuroscience tells us that consciousness arises from the brain, a result of electrical signals and chemical processes among billions of neurons. But even with the most advanced imaging technologies, scientists cannot explain how subjective awareness emerges from this activity. This puzzle is often referred to as the hard problem of consciousness. Despite decades of research, no scientific consensus exists on where consciousness originates, or whether it is even confined to the brain. Some theories propose that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, not unlike space, time, or gravity. This idea, known as panpsychism, suggests that consciousness might be woven into the fabric of reality itself, with all matter possessing some degree of awareness. Others speculate that consciousness arises only when matter reaches a certain level of complexity, such as the human brain. But even then, the precise mechanism remains elusive. This leads many researchers to examine cases where consciousness appears to act independently of the brain. Near-death experiences provide a compelling case study. In several well-documented instances, patients declared clinically dead, meaning no detectable brain activity, have returned to life with detailed recollections of events that occurred while they were unconscious. Some accurately described conversations among doctors or objects in the room that were beyond their physical line of sight. These accounts continue to challenge the idea that the brain is the sole source of consciousness. In 2001, a large-scale study, conducted in the Netherlands by cardiologist Dr. Pim van Lommel, examined more than 300 survivors of cardiac arrest. Nearly one-fifth reported vivid experiences during their period of clinical death. These were not hallucinations in the traditional sense. Many described enhanced clarity, expanded perception, and a sense of being beyond time and space. Dr. van Lommel concluded that consciousness might continue in some form even after measurable brain function has ceased. Some physicists have approached the mystery from a different angle, asking whether quantum mechanics could help explain the persistence of consciousness after death. The quantum mind hypothesis proposes that consciousness arises from quantum processes occurring in microtubules within neurons. These processes, some believe, may not be limited by the constraints of space and time. If true, then death might not mark the end of consciousness, but a change in its state or location. While these ideas remain controversial, they reflect an ongoing shift in scientific thinking. Increasingly, researchers are willing to explore models that challenge the traditional view of the brain as a closed system. Instead, they ask whether the brain may function more like a receiver, tuning into a broader field of consciousness. If so, the moment of death might simply represent the turning of a dial, disconnecting the signal from the body, but not from the universe. As we look deeper into the scientific data surrounding death, a curious pattern begins to emerge, one that suggests something measurable might persist beyond the body's last breath. Modern medicine has created conditions in which individuals can be brought back from clinical death, offering rare glimpses into what may happen after the heart stops. During cardiac arrest, oxygen stops flowing to the brain. Within seconds, the cortex shuts down. Yet in this brief window, something strange can occur. In 2014, researchers at the University of Southampton conducted the largest medical study ever focused on near-death experiences. It involved more than 2,000 patients who had suffered cardiac arrest across 15 hospitals. Of those who survived, hundreds reported detailed memories, even though their brains were not functioning in any measurable way during the time of the event. One man described observing the medical team from above, accurately recounting procedures that took place while he was unconscious for more than 3 minutes. His account was later verified by hospital staff. This phenomenon is not isolated. Studies across North America, Europe, and Asia have documented similar cases. The data suggests that during periods when the brain should be incapable of forming memories, coherent and often transformative experiences still occur. This directly challenges the assumption that consciousness is entirely dependent on brain function. Even more intriguing are the consistent elements reported across cultures, religions, and time periods. Many describe a tunnel of light, a feeling of being pulled away from the body, encounters with non-physical entities, and an overwhelming sense of peace or interconnectedness. These are not random hallucinations. The similarities suggest a structured experience, one that is shared regardless of personal belief systems. Some scientists argue that these experiences are simply the result of the brain releasing chemicals during trauma. Theories involving dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, a naturally occurring compound in the human brain, have been proposed. DMT is known to produce intense visionary states. However, this theory does not fully account for verified perceptions of events occurring outside the body or for memories formed during periods of zero brain activity. Other studies have focused on electrical surges that occur at the moment of death. In 2013, researchers recorded a sudden spike in gamma-wave activity in rats just after cardiac arrest. Similar patterns have been observed in human subjects. These surges suggest a burst of organized brain activity, possibly representing the brain's final effort to make sense of the dying process. But again, this does not explain reports that include accurate external observations. Ultimately, the scientific findings raise more questions than answers. If conscious awareness can exist in the absence of normal brain function, then what mechanism allows it to continue? And if memories are formed during this state, where are they stored? These questions are forcing scientists to rethink the relationship between the brain, the mind, and the broader field of consciousness that may extend beyond both. Mainstream science continues to search for answers grounded in established models of biology, neurology, and physics. According to the conventional view, consciousness is generated by neural activity within the brain. When that activity stops, the self disappears. Under this model, death is final. What we call the soul is merely a byproduct of complex electrical interactions. Thoughts, emotions, and memory cease entirely when the system shuts down. This perspective is rooted in materialism, the idea that only physical matter is real, and that all phenomena, including consciousness, can be reduced to physical interactions. However, not all scientists agree with this reductionist view. Some researchers have proposed dualistic or non-local models of consciousness. These ideas challenge the assumption that the brain produces consciousness. Instead, they suggest the brain might act as a filter or receiver, allowing consciousness to interface with the physical world. This shift would mean that when the body dies, consciousness is not extinguished, but simply moves out of range. Still, the dominant position in neuroscience is grounded in what can be measured. Functional magnetic resonance imaging, electroencephalograms, and neural mapping technologies all point to strong correlations between brain activity and mental states. Specific regions are linked to language, emotion, memory, and identity. When these areas are damaged, associated abilities decline. This reinforces the idea that the brain is the seat of consciousness. Yet correlation does not always imply causation. The fact that consciousness correlates with brain activity does not necessarily mean it is caused by it. Critics of the materialist model argue that brain damage may interfere with the brain's ability to access or transmit consciousness, like a broken radio distorting a broadcast. This is not a mainstream view, but it has gained traction in fields exploring anomalous cognitive states, near-death experiences, and psi phenomena. Within mainstream biology, another explanation for near-death experiences centers on oxygen deprivation. When the brain is deprived of oxygen, neurons begin to fire erratically. This can produce hallucinations, tunnel vision, and feelings of euphoria. Some scientists argue that this explains the common features of near-death reports. However, this theory does not account for accurate veridical perceptions, memories of real events that occurred while the patient was clinically dead. Skeptics also suggest that near-death experiences are products of memory reconstruction. According to this view, the brain attempts to make sense of trauma by creating a narrative after recovery. But again, this fails to explain the timing of specific recollections that occur while no brain function is measurable. Despite these contradictions, most scientists remain cautious. They seek mechanisms that can be tested, replicated, and quantified. In this framework, death marks the irreversible loss of brain function and the end of personal consciousness. Yet the data coming from clinical observations continues to stretch the limits of this definition. As more cases emerge, the boundaries between established science and unexplained phenomena become increasingly difficult to draw. As the boundaries of mainstream understanding are tested, a growing number of researchers and theorists are turning to alternative models of consciousness and death, ideas often considered fringe, yet deeply compelling. One such theory draws from quantum mechanics. The field of quantum consciousness suggests that our awareness may not be confined to the biological brain, but may exist as a quantum process embedded in the structure of the universe itself. Physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff developed a theory called orchestrated objective reduction, or ORC-OR. According to this model, consciousness arises from quantum vibrations within microtubules, tiny structures inside neurons. Unlike classical electrical signals, quantum states can exist in multiple possibilities at once, a concept known as superposition. When a quantum collapse occurs, it selects one reality. Penrose and Hameroff propose that this collapse is the moment of conscious experience. If correct, this would mean consciousness is not limited by space or time in the way traditional brain processes are. It could persist in some form even after death. Hameroff suggests that when the body dies, the quantum information stored in the microtubules is not lost, but rather dissipates into the universe. This echoes ancient spiritual beliefs in the soul's return to a cosmic source, but through the language of quantum physics. Other fringe theories explore the possibility that consciousness interacts with parallel realities. In multiverse models, our universe is just one among an infinite number of others. If consciousness can exist independently of the physical brain, it might continue in another version of reality. This has led some to speculate that death in one timeline may be followed by continuity in another, a kind of quantum immortality. While there is no experimental proof for this idea, it reflects a broader shift in how scientists and philosophers are thinking about identity, perception, and the structure of reality. Some theorists propose that the universe itself may be a vast field of consciousness, and that individual awareness arises when this field becomes locally concentrated in a brain or body. This view, called cosmopsychism, inverts the traditional model. Instead of consciousness emerging from matter, matter emerges from consciousness. In this framework, death is not an end, but a reintegration with the universal mind. These concepts blur the line between physics and metaphysics. They challenge our assumptions not only about death, but about the nature of life itself. If consciousness is fundamental, not emergent, then our understanding of reality must change. It means the universe is not a cold mechanical machine, but something more participatory and alive. Though speculative, these theories are not entirely unscientific. They build on known properties of quantum systems, such as entanglement and non-locality, which defy classical intuition. If particles can influence each other across vast distances instantly, what does that say about the fabric of reality? Could consciousness itself be a field that connects all living things across space and time? These are not questions the current scientific establishment is fully prepared to answer, but they represent a bold frontier where physics, philosophy, and ancient wisdom begin to converge. Throughout history, the question of what happens after death has never been confined to laboratories or physics equations. It has shaped religions, inspired rituals, and fueled philosophical debates across every civilization. While science seeks mechanisms, many traditions have long interpreted death through symbolic and spiritual frameworks, often echoing concepts now being explored at the frontiers of consciousness research. In Hinduism, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, known as samsara, is driven by karma, the law of cause and effect. The soul, or Atman, is considered eternal, simply changing form as it moves through lifetimes. Death is not seen as a failure or an end, but as a necessary step toward liberation, or moksha, the release from material existence and union with the divine. In Tibetan Buddhism, the moment of death opens the bardo, an intermediate state filled with visions, sounds, and luminous beings. How one navigates the bardo determines the circumstances of the next life, or whether liberation is achieved. In ancient Egyptian belief, death was a journey through a landscape of judgment and trial. The soul was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, symbolizing truth. If the soul was found pure, it entered the field of reeds, a paradise mirroring earthly life in ideal form. These beliefs were not abstract. They were reflected in architecture, astronomy, and the rituals of mummification, all intended to prepare the soul for its passage through the afterlife. Christian traditions speak of heaven and hell, with the soul judged by its earthly deeds. Islamic teachings describe the soul's questioning by angels in the grave, followed by resurrection and judgment on the day of reckoning. Indigenous cultures across the Americas, Africa, and Oceania often describe the dead as continuing to exist as ancestors, guiding the living and remaining part of the natural world. Despite cultural differences, one idea appears again and again, that consciousness endures in some form beyond death, and that how we live shapes what comes after. Some modern thinkers have drawn parallels between these ancient teachings and the idea of consciousness as a non-local field. The soul's journey through the afterlife bears resemblance to descriptions of expanded awareness during near-death experiences. The process of rebirth mirrors theories of quantum continuity. The image of being judged for one's deeds echoes the life review reported by many who have temporarily crossed the boundary of death. These similarities suggest that spiritual traditions may have encoded deep insights about consciousness long before the tools of neuroscience or physics existed. Mystics and sages across cultures have described the same fundamental truth in different languages, that death is a transformation, not a termination. Whether one views this as metaphor or literal reality, it remains one of the most persistent and powerful ideas in human thought. In many ways, it reflects an intuitive knowing that the essence of who we are is not bound by the body alone, and that something continues, even if we do not yet fully understand what that something is. As the conversation around death, consciousness, and the universe deepens, a convergence begins to take shape, a meeting point between scientific inquiry, spiritual tradition, and philosophical reflection. At its core is a simple yet profound question. If consciousness does not end at death, then where does it go? And more importantly, what does that reveal about the nature of reality itself? The idea that consciousness might continue beyond physical death challenges the very foundation of materialist science, which holds that all phenomena can be explained through matter and energy alone. Yet evidence from near-death experiences, quantum theories, and ancient teachings hints at something more, a field of awareness that may transcend physical boundaries. If this is true, then the universe may not simply be a container of matter, but a living system of interconnected intelligence. In recent years, this concept has found unexpected resonance in modern cosmology. Theoretical physicist Max Tegmark has proposed that consciousness may be a state of matter in itself, a pattern that emerges from specific informational structures. According to this view, just as water can exist as liquid, ice, or vapor, consciousness could be another emergent phase of matter. If so, death might represent a phase transition rather than an endpoint. Others have explored the notion of information persistence in the universe. In physics, information is never truly destroyed. When a star collapses into a black hole, the matter may vanish, but the information it contained is theorized to remain encoded at the event horizon. Some physicists suggest the same principle might apply to human consciousness. If every thought, memory, and experience is a form of information, then perhaps it too remains preserved in the structure of space-time, even after the body ceases to function. This leads to another provocative idea, that consciousness and the universe are fundamentally entangled. In the language of quantum mechanics, entanglement describes a condition where two particles remain connected, regardless of distance. Some philosophers speculate that our consciousness may be entangled with a greater field, one that survives the dissolution of the brain. This would not only explain the continuity of awareness in near-death experiences, but also the sense of unity and timelessness often described by those who have come close to death. These interpretations do not require belief in a deity or a religious doctrine. They arise from observable patterns, repeatable experiences, and the logical extension of scientific theories. At the same time, they open doors to ancient ideas that once seemed unprovable or symbolic. Perhaps the reason cultures across time and place have envisioned an afterlife is not mere wishful thinking, but an echo of something real, something we are only beginning to understand. If consciousness is more than the flicker of neurons in a biological machine, then death may be no more final than the closing of a book. The pages remain, the words endure, and perhaps, just perhaps, the story continues, written not in flesh, but in the very code of the cosmos itself. With so many perspectives, clues, and theories in play, one might wonder whether a unified picture of death and consciousness will ever emerge. Yet the patterns are undeniable. Whether viewed through ancient rites, cutting-edge physics, or first-hand near-death accounts, a singular theme persists. Death appears to be less a termination and more a transformation. This does not mean the process is fully understood. Far from it. But what was once dismissed as myth or metaphysics is now returning to the realm of scientific consideration. Consider the reports of individuals who have clinically died and returned not only with vivid memories, but with permanent changes in personality, perception, and worldview. Many lose their fear of death entirely. Others speak of feeling more connected to nature, more compassionate, more attuned to something greater than themselves. These psychological shifts suggest that whatever occurs during those moments near death, it is not a hallucination or delusion. It alters lives. It reshapes identities. Medical studies have attempted to quantify these after-effects. One peer-reviewed study published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease found that near-death experiencers consistently scored higher on measures of personal growth, life meaning, and altruism than those who had not had such experiences. In many cases, the changes were permanent, even decades later. From a psychological standpoint, this is significant. From a metaphysical standpoint, it may point to a broader truth about human consciousness and its resilience. Even more remarkable are the growing efforts to document veridical perception during clinical death. Researchers have begun placing hidden symbols or objects in emergency rooms, only visible from elevated angles or behind equipment. The goal is to determine whether individuals who claim to leave their bodies can perceive things they should not physically be able to see. While results are still being compiled, a few documented cases have reported accurate observations that cannot be easily explained by conventional models. It is worth noting that similar experiences have been described during meditation, deep trance states, and certain psychoactive journeys. In each case, individuals report entering realms of light, timeless awareness, or encounters with conscious presences. While these experiences vary in detail, they often carry a shared emotional tone: peace, awe, unity, and unconditional love. This emotional consistency further challenges the view that such states are chaotic neurological artifacts. Instead, they may reflect interaction with a deeper level of consciousness, perhaps one that becomes fully revealed only when the veil of the physical world lifts. These findings raise ethical, medical, and philosophical questions. If death is not an abrupt end but a transition, what responsibilities do we carry in the way we care for the dying? What implications arise for our understanding of identity, purpose, and connection? And how might a broader acceptance of post-material consciousness reshape science, society, and spirituality? Piece by piece, a mosaic is forming. It is not yet a complete image, but the fragments suggest a reality more intricate and mysterious than previously imagined. A reality where death may be not the closing of a door, but the opening of another. In the vast story of the universe, death has always appeared to be a boundary, a final event separating the known from the unknowable. Yet as we gather fragments from science, medicine, philosophy, and ancient wisdom, a different possibility takes shape. Death may not be a wall, but a threshold, not an ending, but a change in state. Like ice becoming water or water becoming vapor, consciousness may shift form when it leaves the body, continuing in ways we are only beginning to imagine. The evidence does not point to a single conclusion. Instead, it opens a field of possibilities. Near-death experiences challenge our understanding of perception and time. Quantum theories propose that consciousness may be woven into the very structure of the cosmos. Spiritual traditions across centuries offer detailed maps of the afterlife, each describing journeys that unfold beyond the physical senses. And modern medicine, despite all its tools and techniques, cannot fully explain why so many report vivid, transformative experiences in moments where brain function should be absent. These converging lines of inquiry do not yet form a science of the afterlife, but they do suggest that the mind may not be confined to the brain, and that death may not destroy awareness. Instead, consciousness may move, through space, through dimensions, or through layers of reality that current science has not yet charted. Whether this journey leads to reunion with a universal intelligence, rebirth into another life, or absorption into a greater field of awareness remains unknown. What is clear, however, is that the question of what happens when we die touches more than biology or physics. It forces us to consider the nature of self, the origins of thought, and the possibility that we are more than the sum of our atoms. It asks whether life is a brief spark in the dark, or a single movement in a symphony that continues long after the last breath. This mystery has driven sages to meditate in caves, scientists to map the brain, and civilizations to build pyramids aligned with the stars. It has shaped our stories, our rituals, and our sense of meaning. And perhaps the reason it remains unanswered is not because it cannot be known, but because it invites each of us to approach it not just with logic, but with wonder. Thanks for listening. This has been Mysteries of the Universe. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show and unlock bonus content, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.